again. Three problems. Letter A, find how much is 80% of $40. $80 of $40. Letter B, how much is 75% of $40? And letter C, estimate I don't know if I like the estimate. Estimate 8.25, estimate 8.25% tax, 8.25%, does it use 0.25? It does, on a $1995 purchase. If you remember, ladies and gentlemen, yesterday we talked about changing percents to decimals and decimals to fractions and yada, 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 all that sort of stuff here. You got to be able to tie all that together to be able to do this practical application, which means stuff you might actually have to do. For example, unless you never do any shopping, okay, you're going to use this bottom one here. Talk to your parents about taxes. They hate it. Everybody hates taxes, but it's the way our world has to be because we have to have a government to protect us and to put roads and libraries and police and fire and all that sort of stuff there. But the first thing I'm going to tell you is this. Okay, when you talk about percents of something, that word of is a key word. The word of in math, 90% of the times means you are going to multiply. Okay, if you want to find 80% of 40, you need to multiply 80% times 40. Okay? Now, secondly, the problem with that is we don't deal with percents in doing mathematical operations well. In other words, you need to get rid of the percent in order to do the math, to do the multiplication. And here is where you should be very happy because you get your choice of whether you want to change 80% to a decimal or a fraction. And sometimes one is easier than the other. Okay? You can pick whichever one you want, but in this case here, I mean, we can do it both ways. First of all, 80% as a decimal is, Andrew Mueller. Remember our rule for changing percents to decimals? We talked about it yesterday. You just
put a decimal 2 places to the left.
right. You bring the decimal 2 places left, so the decimal equivalent of 80% is 0.80. And the nice thing in math is you don't need ending zeros when it comes to decimals. So when I actually do the multiplication here, I can just take 40 times 0.8. And my answer is going to be 32. And as you do these, Sam Poppin, as you do these, you should probably, take a little time to think about what your answer should be. 80% of $40. What's a reasonable answer for that? Well, 100% of $40 would be $40, so 80% has to be a little less than that, but not a lot less because it is 80%. It's close to 100, so 32 makes sense. If you got 320, that doesn't make sense because, 320 is going to be a lot more than 40. So that is the answer to this first one. It would be 32. If I wanted to do it as a fraction, 80% as a fraction is what? I know that's a tough one there, Alex Wilmer.
Well, it would be 80 over 100, but you can reduce it to 8 cents.
Right, we could start with 80 over 100, but if you want a fraction that would be easy to use when you multiply it by 40, okay, you could just cross off those ending zeros in the fraction, divide it by 10, reduce it, and then it works pretty nicely because, well, do we do cross canceling? Have you guys done cross canceling?
Yeah.
Alright, 10 goes into 40 4 times. 4 times 8 is 32. You still get 32. Okay, if that works for you, a little cross canceling there. Now, what about 75%? In this case here, really to me, probably the quicker way, I don't know. It really wasn't very hard to multiply by the decimal. The decimal might have been the easier way because, we might be a little shaky on the cross canceling of fractions and stuff. Okay, but 75%, yeah, Kendall, you have a question, you're gonna tell me something.
I was gonna tell you.
70 of this one? I don't want the answer, I wanna know what 75% is as a decimal. 75%, huh? 0.75. So you could do the multiplication like this, and in this case, I'd pick to put the decimal on top because it's easy to multiply with a 40 on the bottom. You don't have to. Put a 0 down, 4 times 5 is 20, 28, 30, 2 decimal places. So 30 would be your answer to that. Now in this case though, I think a fraction is probably easier because 75% is what fraction? There are certain percentages that you should know the fractions of right off the bat. This would be one of them. Caleb? Gabe? How many times was that? Yeah. 75% is the same thing as 3/4, and 3/4 times 40, 4 crosses off with a 40 to leave you with a 10. 3 times 10 is 30. Okay, and to me, that one right there is probably quicker and easier for me. And then on this last one, they kind of went easy on you because of this right here. The word estimate means that you are allowed to make it easy to work with whatever. I mean, you should be able to do this kind of remotely in your head. What would you round $19.95 off to, Morgan?
$20.
$20. What would you round 8 1/4% to? Kendall? 8%. Now here is where it would be good for you. It would be good for you to take a moment to think about what a reasonable answer of what is 8% of 20. What is a reasonable thought on 8% of 20? Taylor?
Like you just put fraction 8/10.
I'm looking for a reasonable answer. What would be a reasonable answer? And the first thing you start off with is thinking 50%. 50% of 20 is 10, half of it. So you know it's got to be much less than that because 8% is much less than 50%. So if you get anything more than 10, you know you're pretty much off kilter. So a good guess, maybe, and why, Morgan?
Like $1.
Like $1. Well, the other one I might go with is 10%. What would 10% of $20 be? Is it $2? $2. So this is 8% is going to be a little less than $2, right? So that's a pretty good start right there. Now, what am I going to do to find my answer? Just do a little multiplication there. $20, and here's where you have to be careful. Where I see most people make a mistake is they put the decimal equivalent for 8% as 0.8, which is not 8%, but 80%. 8% is 0.08. And that's a big difference when you start thinking about what you'll end up for an answer. 8 times 0, 8 times 2 is 16. 2 decimal places gives you $1.60. So that's a pretty reasonable thing. If you would have done 80%, you would have got $16, which in your mind, hopefully you can say that's a little bit too large. Now, one last thing before I throw you off there here. One little trick for y'all here. 18% of 50. You should be able to tell me the answer to that right now. Who knows it? 18% of 50. Almost no calculation involved in this at all. Andrew?
Nice.
And how'd you get that so fast?
Because 50 is half of 100, and 18% of 100 is 18, so just divide 18. What?
What?
Yeah, I get it.
I like it, Ashley. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking that it's 32 because if you just double 50 and then you just double 18%.
Okay, Holly.
That one makes more sense.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Kendall. It's not right, but thank you.
Oh. No.
Sometimes math isn't, well, it isn't always about that. Let me give you a little trick here, children. The beauty of mathematics here. When you have 18% of 50, when you talk about percentages, 18% of 50 is the exact same thing as 50% of 18. They mean this, you'll end up with the same answer, whether you change the percent to the other one or the other one. And sometimes that handy little trick can save you some time. So like Andrew was saying, he did this kind of a little way there. 50% is half, so half of 18 is 9. Another example where that might come in handy is if you had 36% of 25. It doesn't help you in all cases, but when you come up with some nice percents that things, other numbers that aren't the percents that you wish were the percents, you can make it the percent. 36% of 25 is the same thing as 25% of 36. And since 25% is 1/4, you just have to say, oh, 1/4 of 36 is 9. Handy dandy little trick.
Andy, does it always work?
Yes, it does. You can always take the percent, move it to the other thing, and call it, and do the thing there.
So we don't multiply with that?
Yes, you do. Well, you are. Why wouldn't you?
When you divide though,
Well, but you have to remember when you multiply by a fraction, you are actually dividing by the bottom number. Same kind of different kind of thing here. Okay, not always will this help you, but sometimes it will. Sometimes you'll find one where you say like, hey, you know, it's just easier to think about it the flip-flop way, but it does always work.